Server performance is critical to efficient network operations. Establishing a performance baseline enables you to observe trends in workloads and resource usage, test configuration changes, and identify potential problems. This presentation explains the general steps for creating a baseline and the components of performance monitoring. A baseline is the level of system performance that you decide is acceptable. You should establish the baseline when the server is handling a typical workload. When you establish what the acceptable level is, such as the proper air pressure for a tire, then deviations from that measurement are a signal to you that there may be a problem. To create a baseline, you identify the resources that you want to measure, capture the data, store the data for analysis. There are 4 major resources that you want to measure when establishing your baseline: memory, processor, physical disk, and network. The other resources that you measure depend on the role of the server in the network environment. To capture the data for each resource that you want to measure, you can use the Performance Console started from Administrative Tools. The Performance Console contains System Monitor, which you can use to view data on a local computer, on remote computers, and from logs. The Performance Console also contains performance logs and alerts. In Performance Logs and Alerts, you can configure counter logs, configure trace logs, and configure performance alerts. When you configure a monitoring session, you specify the performance objects, object counters, and object instances of the resources that you want to measure. While a system component or resource performs work, it generates performance data. That data is described as a performance object. For example, the processor object is a collection of performance data about processors on your system. Each performance object provides counters that represent data on specific aspects of a system or service. For example, the bytes printed per second counter provided by the print queue object tracks the printing speed. Some performance objects, such as print queue, can have multiple instances. When an object has multiple instances, you can add counters to track statistics for each instance or for all instances at once. You store performance data in logs. You can use logged data to measure system performance over a specific period of time for later analysis and for exporting to reports. For a baseline, take samplings of 30 to 45 minutes over a week period, ensuring that the samplings are done during peak, low, and normal operations. Archive the log for future troubleshooting. You can view the log data in System Monitor. Let's examine how you interpret data. This example shows log data displayed in System Monitor. The log captured data from 3 counters: pages per second for the memory object, average disk queue length for the physical disk object, and percent of processor time for the processor object. The graph section shows the activity levels during the duration of the log. The numerical value of the graphs varies according to the scale for each counter. Notice that 2 of these counters have scales of 0 to 1.0. The other counter has a scale of 0 to 100. Use the counter scale to interpret the graph correctly. You should always use the same scale when comparing performance levels. When you select a counter in the list, you can see the minimum, maximum, and average values for the log data, as well as the duration. By comparing these values over time to the baseline values, you can monitor the effects of configuration changes on server performance.